Okay, so this is an overview. It's our discussion section or help section about LMMS. So uh, you were requested to install LMMS as part of the first class in preparation for the homework. Actually, if you look at the first assignment, you will be using LMMS. We will be talking about LMMS more in detail next week again when we talk about the concept of digital audio workstation. But right now, I would like to show you what LMMS is about, so it kind of makes sense, and mostly to show or explain two things. One is the motivation for using LMMS, not only just as a tool, but also and not as a tool to production tool, not only as a way to create sounds for your homework, but also as a tool that allows to demonstrate aspects related to the class, I don't know to call it theoretical aspects, but the broader aspects of music technology and music and computer games, because it actually encompasses some basic concepts about how technology and music are related, and even has a specific implementation of game sound instruments. So the idea that we need some sort of a software, some sort of a technological tool that would allow us to represent music in a digital format and use the musical information in order to then play it back was really a basic concept that uh, emerged from the early games, right? But you would say maybe in the very early games, you had some other pianolas or some other mechanisms. Of course, you could have bells and then springs and things that would mechanically create things on pinball game machines. You could have some music players. So the video that we will see later on, or actually film about the history of um, uh, music for games, which includes many more interviews. I've requested you to assign you to see one of the videos in the overview in the introduction. We'll have a much more elaborate video later on through the class, actually a film, um, where we'll kind of see how the technology evolved from mechanical devices and even the idea that game machines were considered as musical playback devices just because a game as something that allows you to win or gambling was illegal. So music actually played even almost a illegal necessity in the game. So it would be considered as a musical playback device that you can throw a coin in to listen to the music, and the fact that you could win something from that game machine was a legal loophole. But besides that anecdote, I mean, the idea is that if you have a device, you have a device that has music and that device responds to user actions, that requires some way of representing music in a way that then this little mechanism, this machine, this electronic circuit could recognize. So what we see here is kind of a modern version of an authoring tool, an editing tool, but it has a lot of elements that evolved from the very early uses um, of using computers or technology in general to generate music. So welcome to the LMMS. As I mentioned before, it's a free editor. It exists on all platforms. It has an active support group. The documentation is not bad. I mean, it's reasonable. I will not walk you so much through the website, but if you go on that website and look for documentation or wiki, you basically type \wiki, you can see a slightly different way to access the same documentation. Um, but I will kind of show really what we need or the basic thing we want to do for the homework for the first assignment. And for the first assignment, we'll be using this interface, which is called basically piano roll, that allows us to enter notes. Now, how do we access this interface? So this interface actually is when you open a new project. Okay, so if we go and we create a new project in just a second. So that's just an empty project. Right? We might even have, blank view like this that basically has a song editor and nothing else. And if everything is closed, then what we have here is, and it depends what button is clicked here, we might also not see much from this sidebar. So let me kind of explain what we have here. And the important part is there are these two lines of buttons. One actually handles things like we have seen before. You can create a new project. You can create a project from a template. You can open a project. So when you actually start or install LMMS, you had to set up some default place for your projects. This is done in the preferences, where you can actually specify, when you click on this folder button, you can specify where you want your files to be saved. And the main thing would be the LMMS working directory. Later on, we'll also talk about sound fonts. You're probably not going to need the VST plugins and LADSPA plugins, but it will be set up in the same directory for you. So just make sure that you have your working directory, and if you want to change specific locations for the sound fonts or the plugins, you can do this as well. So once we have that, there's some settings for audio, which hopefully, so this is for the audio, hopefully just out of the box, you might want to check here and see if you need to play around with this. If you have any problems and issues with this, we can either meet during class time as a group or send me a message and we can address this during the office hours. This one is so-called MIDI. It allows you to connect an external keyboard. I don't want to switch videos and show you how a MIDI keyboard can be connected. In principle, you can also use in LMMS your computer keyboard to enter notes, but we'll be using the mouse. So assuming you have everything set up, and as I mentioned, this first row of buttons basically just handles files, opening files, closing files. I mean, this gives you, let me see, I mean, you have this nice info button that if you hover over, it should actually tell you what this is. Yeah, this is the recently opened projects, okay? This allows you to save the current project, export current project. We'll see what it means to export, because you actually need to take the whatever you created and put it in the existing format, so either audio or MIDI. Tempo, we'll talk about this later. The metronome, which will give you the tempo once you play it back. So here starts more of musical settings, your time signature. That requires maybe a little bit of musical knowledge. For those who are not familiar with concepts of tempo and the time signature, I wouldn't worry about them. You can do your projects with the current setting for, 4 quarters. The 4x4 time signature is usually standard way of counting by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You might want to play with the tempo and make your project faster or slower. You just click the button here and drag. Now this is very small. I hope it will be visible in the video. So the second line is really what you would want to start using for your project, and it has specific windows. And the leftmost one is the song editor, and this is your basic element that you want to be able to use. Some other things that you might have in the editor itself would be more technical, more specific, like the beat and bass bassline or bassline editor. We won't be using it necessarily now, so you don't worry about this. You have this piano roll, which is really helpful, and it will open as part of the project. Okay, we have a mixer, the effects mixer, which is really more of an advanced use. If we want to add some kind of a reverb or some ambience to the sound, we might want to look into this later. This is not required for the project either. Okay, you have notes that you can take, project notes. This is just a little text that you can document, and it helps a lot if you can keep track of what you're doing. And eventually you can even submit this as part of the documentation for your project. Okay, and this is, yeah, controller rec. We also will not be using this because we can add some controls or some functions for the filters, so forget about this. So basically, what I said, we'll be using this one, and as part of this song editor, we actually have an ability to start adding tracks and instruments. So right now we don't have anything here. We start with a blank, and now we want to put into the song editor an instrument. So think about this almost like, you know, you come to a room and you invite a musician who's going to play something. So let's go now over the sidebar here, okay? And the leftmost is your instrument plugins, okay? What are instrument plugins? What are they called plugins? Just because the structure of the modern software is such that these little, you know, tabs here or boxes, they're instruments that somebody else can write for you, and you can drop it into and it will add. So this is why we call them plugins. So for the purpose of the first exercise or the first homework, we'll be using basically a model that comes from the games engine. And you know, if you follow the instructions, you'll see that you basically are requested or asked to use one of these models, okay? And you know, we won't necessarily, no, we don't need to follow a specific one for this demo, okay? But let me just find the one that that I was referring to. So these are emulations of different chips, okay? This is an SID chip. This is just a general synthesizer. Some are specific. These are all different instruments, okay? And some of them are working with specific, this wave table synthesizer that kind of is related to the Beat Invader game, emulation of a Game Boy, okay? And Kicker and LBS, and I'm looking for the NES one, just a second. Yeah, so this is NES-like synthesizer, that's one of them, and there should be, that's an FM synthesizer, we'll talk about this later on, okay? Additive synthesizer, this is not like a typical to specific game. Sound phones, we'll talk about these ones. Another port, SAD, that's, we mentioned this one. Okay, so if we drop one of our instruments here, okay? This is how we create our new musical line. And if you want to know more about the instrument itself, because each instrument is different, we can click on this and we see the settings here, okay? So these are the sounds, okay, that the instrument is supposed to be doing, and for some reason I cannot hear it. Okay. Okay, I'll need to check why we don't have sound here. Maybe it's the preferences. I actually installed a new version of LMMS just before the class, just to make sure that everything's installed right from the website, but maybe I need to do something about the the audio. Okay, placed on my device. Would that work? Okay, let me try just another instrument quickly to see if I have any issues with. Let me put another instrument SFX. No, so I have some audio issue here, which actually worked before. So let me quickly pause the video and solve the sound problem. And it may be something as trivial as some volume button, but I don't want to spend the time during the recording. So I'll pause it and I'll be back in a second. Okay, yeah. So I'll just repeat myself briefly. I had to restart LMMS for some reason, and now it seems to be responding well. So what we have is when I opened this, already my song default editor had some tracks. Actually, it already had one of the instruments here. It has a sample track. It has a beat bass line, which is this thing. So they're all already included in the song editor. But as I said, we don't want to use most of them, so we'll skip the automation. You can actually remove tracks by clicking on this button. So we don't need this, we don't need a sample track. Just not to confuse you with things that we want to do, at least as the first thing, really the simple ones. I did leave here 3 different instruments just because I want to demonstrate or explain what it means, the musical instruments. So if you see, these are all different types of synthesizers. And the beat invader is actually the one that you'll be exploring. And when I press the button, it has a specific sound to it, okay? We can actually, and you will kind of look into that, change the type of sound that we are using for these experiments. And you have here little buttons that are hard to see, but they change the waveform. So if this is maybe the purest one, but now if I want to change this to, let's say, a square one, it definitely sounds as a different quality, right? We call this timbre. So in the early musical synthesizers, the ones that were used in chips, a lot of effort was done actually to create specific electronic devices or circuits that would be able to create different sounds. And these sounds had some of their, options of controlling the sound either preset or allowed you to play around and modify. You could even put noise. This noise maybe is not perfect. Let me try to see if I can get a longer bit of noise here. It's kind of a very noisy type of sound, and it does change with the pitch, but it doesn't have a fixed, really well-defined timbre. So these are the instruments that we want to play with. If we want to use, the beat invader is this one, we can actually open the piano roll for that track. Or maybe before going there, let me kind of just demonstrate the different sounds. So this sounds different than this. And later on, we'll explore some others, like if we take a sound phone player and we want to play on that one, okay, it will sound depending. These would be actually something like, the musical instruments that we can choose here. You have pianos, you have vibraphones. So this technology actually evolved much later on. So we're going to be using this idea that we slowly progress through the type of synthesizers as we trace the timeline for the music and sound games. So this one, see, it sounds very much like a piano because it actually uses a technology that allows us to record bits and pieces of piano And let me just increase maybe the volume if you didn't hear it well. No, okay, so that's it. That doesn't do what I wanted, but yeah. So let's get rid of most of these tracks because we don't need them, and we'll just stay. Let's say just with the beat invader. Okay. So once we want to start entering melodies, okay, into our musical programming device, and before we had these interfaces, people would basically encode this as computer commands. But now we don't need to do this. We can actually use the piano roll editor, which basically opens if you click on these bars. So once you double click on one of them, you'll open one of these bars. You can choose your pen and you can start entering the notes. This is your keyboard. You can see the names of the notes if you want, okay? And you can basically start writing your melody. Sorry. Okay, whatever melody, just something came to my mind. And now this one we want to be. Da, da, da. So you can actually drag and make it longer. And excuse me, I can stretch this out a little bit. But this is, the whole basic principle of how you manipulate. And let's move it back. So the durations of the notes, you can set them either here or it was set to the last note. So now I want to shorten notes. I put 1. Oh, sorry, I didn't get it right. I shouldn't have put 1. It was actually 1/4 note. So these are durations. I can erase this one by using the erase tool and put the new one, the 1/4 note here. And once we're done with our little melody, we can actually play it. Okay, and I got it wrong. I forgot the note here, and I got this one totally different. So sorry about that. But you got the idea, okay? We basically can write our melodies either by kind of scrolling the notes up and down. This is not, the most trivial way of notating things, but now you got your little melody running. So for your first assignment, we'll ask you to create something like 4 bars. But instead of really coming up with a melody, which might be one way you can go with it, and loop, so we can explain how we turn on looping. You see that I got here some kind of a, so I got the rhythmical issue here. I mean, I missed one beat here, so I need to shift everything. I don't want to do this right now. So it doesn't really match a nice looping thing, but in theory, we can actually get this thing to be, this auto scrolling, and what would be my looping thing. So once we get this thing to run, okay, we can actually keep on playing this. So right now, so now the loop is set a little bit too long, so we actually don't want to have this. In order to set the boundaries of this of the song, you have can check out the manual and see how do you set up the looping boundaries and move this back and forth, because it has slightly different controls between Mac and Windows. And we should have here, and the zooming is not the best option, okay? Basically a way to eliminate this extra note. Okay, so right now, yeah, it's not the right melody, but now we have a loop which will be keep on playing as long as this thing is being pressed. Oops, no, the looping didn't work here. Let me quickly. So that's auto scrolling. Loop points, yes. So we allow here the loop points, and now we can decide which part of the looping we want to use. Okay, okay, just a sec. So my buttons are not working for a sec. So let me kind of quickly see. Hold Shift to move to begin, and this is to disable loop points. Yep, but it should be able to scroll it left, back and forth. So this is without looping, this is with looping. Okay, just one more sec. I'll pause the video again until I find. Yeah, apologies for all the technical issues. Just one more sec. Resume recording. Okay, so hopefully I won't repeat myself because it wasn't recorded. So what I was saying, to set up the loop points, we need to have this green area here activated. It's activated by pressing this button. But then if you want to move back and forth on the normal, according to the usual instructions, the manual, it tells you to use the right button because it assumes you're on a Windows machine. So on the Mac, you actually have to hold the combination of Control Command, and then you can actually click and drag your loop. You can also have a Control Shift, and if you click in the middle of a bar, it will set you the loop there, and then you can kind of go and basically start moving this in the directions that you want. So once you have that, you have basically a looping and it will keep playing as long as you wish. So I wanted just to show one more little aspect of LMMS, that the instructions of the first homework actually tell you kind of to, or advise, I mean, it's optional, you can have other ways of doing this, to use something that we call an arpeggio. So we'll be covering a musical form called the prelude, which actually uses a lot of so-called arpeggios. So what is an arpeggio? Arpeggio is a broken chord. So we need to know what a chord is. So to know what a chord is, let me kind of erase this melody here. Sorry, we take this. I'm using the wrong window. Yeah, we select this. We can erase this. Okay. So on the piano roll, we have this little chord selection thing. If we press the button, we see there are a lot of many different chords. In music theory, people actually study what are these and how to read them and how to place them according to your chord progression. So we'll talk a little bit about harmony later on. But right now, let's say we take the basic chord, which is, let's say, a major chord. So most chances people have seen something like a major chord before, but if not, I'll show it right now. So if we take a note like, let's say this middle C, okay? and I press a note here, actually I got 3 notes going instead of 1. And this is my major chord. If I want to play it, I get it here. You see? And I can actually extend it. So here is my major chord. Okay, and I can start now putting a sequence of this. Okay, let's put one on an F somewhere here, just because, you know, just using some of music theory here, but you're not required to do that. And then put one on a G, and maybe go back to one on the F, and this will be your very basic chord progression. You know, the Beat Invader is not the best sound to make these things, but you got the idea. So right now, you can use these chord progressions, and the idea is that you choose any chord you wish. I mean, we really don't want to limit ourselves to kind of classical 1-4-5-1, if anybody knows that one. But you could kind of just go and throw any set of chords and explore. And let's make them a little longer, but not super long. And I have no idea what I'm doing in the sense of musical, because I'm kind of doing just selection of some chords, and I'll put another random chord maybe on the next bar, and so on. Okay. So the idea, of course, not to do it randomly. The idea is that you kind of create something interesting and you play around until you're happy with your musical sequence. Okay. But right now, without having not about any thinking, you get now a set of chords. And let me switch this to sine wave because it sounds really annoying. Maybe that'll be softer. And didn't really help. And there's still pretty annoying sounds, but so now if you want to turn this into something which is more interesting as a melody, we can now start creating these arpeggios. And creating arpeggios would mean that we basically start shifting these notes. Okay, maybe we should have created them shorter. We shift them into some sort of a thing that, okay, I was adding notes without thinking. Okay, now you. So by breaking these things, we're either going up and down, you turn basically a set of chords into something like a melody. And I didn't really work out here the durations of these things, and it doesn't really make much sense, but the original design didn't make sense either, so forgive me about that. But now you get something like this. So hopefully we can do something much more interesting than this one, but I think this is good for now. I mean, basically what I wanted to introduce is the idea that you can use the piano roll, you select your instrument, you can use chords if you want to create basic initial selections of notes. You can start shifting them up or down to create a chord progression, or you can also switch the chords as you go up and down. And then after you've done this, you basically have your kind of a harmonic skeleton, or frankly, that's what it's called. It's a harmonic progression. And the simplest way to turn this into kind of more of a musical rather than these bare bones stuck chords, create an ambience, something that moves up and down and creates some kind of interesting structure, is by starting shifting these notes around. And then, of course, you should pay attention to the rhythm that is created. Right now, also, I was shifting this pretty much randomly, but you can create some interesting rhythmical things. So 4 bars like this, okay, where you kind of listen empirically, just by trial and error, select the sequence of notes, the sequence of chords, or if you want, you can just select the notes without going through the chords process, and creating an interesting loop that has a feel, okay? And that feel is described in the homework as something that you should design as your opening scene for the game. So we call it a scene, but it could be anything. It could be in the forest, it could be, you know, out there or indoors. But that's how you open your game, the opening music, a little prelude. So I hope it kind of made sense because I was kind of going through a lot of details here and assuming maybe some kind of comfortable familiarity with some musical concepts. So if you have any more questions, or I can repeat this when we meet next week, yeah, please let me know. But this was kind of a quick or not so quick introduction to LMMS, the basic beat invader synthesizer, and some of the editing options that use chords and some shifting and looping aspects of this software. So I'll stop the recording and have a few minutes for questions.